Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is an innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Dr. Sam Shay. Dr. Sam Shay is the ebook author of Unplug from Gaming Disorder, 7 Simple Ways to Game Less. He helps gamers with gaming disorders unplug from their screens and plug back into their lives. Dr. Shay also coaches concerned family and friends of problem gamers on how to help support the unplugging process. His ebook is available at drsamshay.com/gaming disorder. Dr. Sam Shay is a chiropractor focusing on functional nutrition and functional testing who has walked his own journey to overcome his 25 years addiction to video games. Also a 15-year addiction to sugar, as well as overcoming his insomnia, fatigue, low mood, chronic pain, and gut problems. Dr. Shay combines his training, personal journey, and clinical experience to help those struggling not only with addictions, but also with chronic health concerns, customizing nutrition and lifestyle plans with advanced functional testing, including testing the adrenal, gut parasites, mitochondria, food intolerances, thyroid, and genetics. Dr. Shay, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today, and it's such an important subject, gaming disorders.
Thank you for having me. It's unfortunately an ever-growing concern. Particularly right now, there's a lot of attention, particularly a game called Fortnite, as just one example, but gaming disorder has been around long before Fortnite's meteoric rise in popularity. Even major newspapers have been running stories on quote Fortnite addiction, and I just want people to understand that gaming disorder is one of several classes of what I would call screen disorders. But video games itself is a particular nuanced version of just overuse of recreational screen time.
So I'm curious because you mentioned that you overcome your own addiction at 25 years. That's a while. I mean that's a quarter of a century. So that's a lot of screen time. And how did you in your personal life recognize that you were addicted? And how were you able to break free from that, in your own life?
Well, I got addicted to games, and first with screens, and then specifically games, because I was dealing with, when I was a child at age 6, a very, very, very stressful divorce of my parents. And it was so stressful, actually, one of my sisters ended up in the hospital with a bleeding stress ulcer. And we all dealt with the stress of the divorce in different ways. In my case, it was one hand on a remote controller, soon game controller, and then the other hand in a bag of something sugary, whether it was breakfast cereal boxes, which were basically glorified desserts masked as breakfast foods, or just overt desserts like candies and candy bars and chocolates and things like that. And what happened was that whenever I felt stressed, whenever it was from a current stressful situation or remembering stress in the past or anticipating stress in the future, I would feel really anxious and nervous, and I would reach for video games to numb out. And then that became the go-to crutch. It just kind of became neurologically wired in that anytime I felt an unpleasant string of emotions, I would want to numb out. And my anesthesia of choice was video games. And I realized that it was a problem because it would become disruptive to my life. It would get in the way. Like I would choose to game knowingly that I was overdoing it, yet I would still continue to game. So like the anesthesia itself became a problem. It's analogous to someone using a substance to numb out pain, but then the substance they use itself becomes a problem. And that's its own separate large-scale addiction issue in the United States and elsewhere. To avoid missing the subtlety, I'm talking about opiates, but there's anytime that something is used to the point where it's cannibalizing one's life and the life around them, then and it becomes a destructive cycle. That basically, I had to hit bottom of sorts, and bottom is a very loaded term in the addiction space. And bottom's also a moving target for different people at different times in their life with different vices to different degrees. And some people, like, all it has to be is that they miss one night of sleep and they miss an exam or they miss a meeting or something happens and they're like, that's it. This can't happen again. And other people, it takes 25 years of that till they reach a point where they've hit bottom enough, either deep enough or frequent enough, where there's a decision that's made that I need help.
Yeah.
And that's what's common amongst what I've seen in addiction space, is that people reach that bottom space, whatever that is, and then they decide that they want help, not just need help. And that's the key distinction. Many people need help but don't want it. And until one wants help, it's very, very difficult to actually be able to receive it.
Yeah, and you recognized, you hit that bottom. What did that bottom look like for you?
Well, as I said, bottom's a moving target, and so bottom for me as a gamer. But when I talk about, what's interesting, when I talk about gaming addiction, I've talked about this for over a decade, and back then people were snickering and chuckling. Now people are very curious and concerned about people they know and are asking me about it sincerely. And when I talk to other people who've been through different addiction programs like the Anonymous crowd, they always ask me the same thing. The first question out of their mouth, what does bottom look like for you? That's their lead question to me. And I asked them, why do you ask me that? And they said, because it's at bottom that the people decide to change, which is kind of where that prior discussion came from. And it's true in my experience. And for me, my bottom in video games looked like gaming until 4 or 5 in the morning and just feeling awful for the next 3 days. Back pain, chronic upper thoracic pain. It looked like skipping meals, skipping family events. And the most common bottom experience that I had was feeling bad and then gaming to numb out and then coming out of the blur of gaming, then feeling worse, because not only do I feel bad for delaying or procrastinating something, I now felt bad for now losing all this time and or sleep and all these other, like skipping meals, skipping all sorts of stuff. It was kind of a rolling series of bottoms of related negative experiences, and that all just coalesced into a final moment right before a large health expo in 2014, where I was going to have a booth on help your child's gaming disorder, and I realized that if a parent came up to me and said, well, do you still game? And if I said yes, that would lose all my credibility. So I stopped gaming, I think 2 days before, 2 or 3 days before that actual expo.
You haven't gamed ever since?
No.
Okay, and why do you think gaming is so addictive? You mentioned that need of kind of numbing out, and you can obviously do that in many different ways. But why do you think gaming in itself is that addictive and so hard to pull away from?
Well, there's many almost any activity can be quote unquote addictive, and even that word is very loaded. When people say the word addiction, they think of someone shivering in the corner with a needle in their arm, vomiting into a bucket. that's a very small percentage of the addicted population. And I prefer to use the word cannibal, which is not my term. That came from two interventionists, Dr. Wainwright and Dr. Pognanovich out of Australia. They wrote a book called "It's Not Okay to Be a Cannibal." And they talk about addiction is best replaced with the word cannibalism because it's more accurate, that you actually consume yourself and the environment and the people around you metaphorically for the addiction. And when the reason why gaming itself is addictive or so cannibalistic is that they're so immediate. They're everywhere. I mean, there's so many things going for gaming. They're interactive, so it's much more engaging than passive consumption or TV or movies. They're immediate. Video games have been baked into, or they're immediate because they're baked into every technology, which means they're extremely accessible, and they're immediate because you can literally push a button. It's not like other addictions where you have to drive to a store necessarily. I mean, if you're going to buy a game, you do, but literally you don't have to go around and buy sugar or buy alcohol or go on a street corner or anything else. So you have to go to special locations. They're everywhere, baked into every technology imaginable, and they're also repeatable, meaning that you can do them over and over again. They're also novel. There's always new games coming out, and they're coming out bigger, better, faster, and even the retro games. Like I started on Sega Master System and Nintendo NES. This is back in the late 80s. Those games, they're called retro games, they're now out for free on many websites known as flash games. And they just, the business models, they market other games that are for pay or other advertising. So even as games get better and better, the retro games are getting more numerous as well as easy, quick games. The other reason games are so addictive, it actually has to do with the hardwired neurology response. There's a response in the body called the tectospinal reflex, and it's for the Scrabble nerds out there. Tecto, T-E-C-T-O, spinal, tectospinal reflex. It stands for a targeting reflex that's mediated through the brain stem, where you see there's a rapid change visually in color, brightness, or motion, or a loud, sharp sound. Your neck and eyes automatically turn towards that change in visual stimulation or auditory stimulation. So it's like a police light. What is a police? Everyone quickly looks at a police siren as it's there on the highway. You have to target it because it's a rapid change in color. It's red and blue. It's a rapid change in motion because the lights are spinning, and it's a change in brightness because one light comes towards you, gets brighter, and the other light goes away from you, gets dimmer. And that's a holdover from hunter-gatherer times. If you're walking in the forest and there's a flash of orange in the corner of your eye, you are hardwired to turn and look at it to check to see if it's a tiger. And when that happens, the key point is that you fire the stress response. So every time your eye targets, or the technical term is saccade, to a novel visual stimuli or rapidly moving stimuli or change in brightness, you're firing the stress response. That is why people are quote-unquote glued to the screen, because they're neurologically hardwired to look for danger in that rapid change in color, light, brightness, or motion. And sound is the same thing. You get a sharp sound, you'll turn your head to look. Like a gunshot, your head will turn in the direction of the gunshot. Video games have made this an art to rapidly change the color, motion, and brightness, as well as to change the sound interactions. Like the ka-ching sound when you do particularly well at Candy Crush or whatever your little game, whatever the game is, whether it's a little handheld or a large epic game like the God of War series. So those are the main reasons why games are so addictive. And the other reason why they're addictive is that small children can get access to them, unlike a lot of other addictive substances like alcohol or cigarettes. So there can be a great deal of imprinting starting from a young age with video games.
We're going to take a quick break, and I want to expand on that a little bit more when we come back. You're listening to HealthMade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Sam Shay talking about gaming disorders. Welcome back to HealthMade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Sam Shay talking about how you can unplug from gaming disorders. So do you feel a couple of points? First, you're saying that it causes a stress response, and that's part of the addiction process. So how can a stress response become addictive?
It's the addiction itself is it's a hard wiring of the nervous system because with video games there's a lot of excitement and interest and engagement, and one of the main reasons people reach for video games is to avoid boredom, and to understand it's not just the stress response that engages addiction. That's not the whole piece, or necessarily even the major piece. It's one of the, in terms of the stress response being released by the tectospinal reflex. Mm-hmm. The stress response that triggers the addiction cycle is prior to that, where addiction itself is triggered by believing stressful thoughts, which then trigger a stressful emotional, physical response in the body, which then leads to the desire to numb out. Like, my parents are divorcing, and I believe like my world is collapsing, and I feel a lot of anxiety over that, and I reach for video games to numb out. Mm-hmm. The stress response triggered by the tectospinal reflex is related, but not the same thing that I'm talking about in terms of the addiction cycle. It's just a way to keep the tectospinal reflex is there that keeps people in, one of the mechanisms to keep people constantly engaged with the video games. So it's
almost like, for instance, you experienced this trauma. Your children or your parents were divorcing when you're 6 years old. So you're needing something that screams louder than that trauma. So then to have something that engages you that much, engage your brain that much, that would allow you then to, like you said, numb out, because it takes over all your senses.
Correct. And that's whether you're numbing out a overt stressful belief like my world is falling apart because my parents are divorcing, or you're numbing out a very subtle yet very sinister stressful belief like I'm bored. Mm-hmm. The journey is the same. Stressful belief creates stressful body emotional response, leads to reaching for anesthesia, in my case, video games and sugar. I'm bored is the single most sinister, stressful thought on the planet, in my opinion, because no one realizes how stressful that thought actually is.
Yeah,
they just think I'm bored.
Yeah,
that's not a benign thought. That creates a lot of anxiety and fidgetiness that leads to people wanting to numb that anxiety and fidgetiness, and therefore, video games as an example. They reach for that.
And instead of then a bottle of alcohol or smoking or drugs or whatever it may be. But you mentioned, the danger of it is the accessibility even for young children. Like, they can't go and buy a bottle of booze, but they can reach for video games. So and you're talking about the hard wiring. So what does that do to a young child's brain, if by playing games, at such an early age, formative years?
Yeah, I mean, there's in the formative years. So there's, I just want to take a step back in terms of who's actually playing games, because we'll talk about young children for sure, but I just want to throw in a reality check for listeners who, when they think of a gamer, the first image that conjures to their mind is the stereotypical or under 18 male gamer who plays war games, fighting games and shooting games. And I want to alert people that only 17% of the gaming population is under 18 and male. That's only 17%.
Yeah.
And these aren't my statistics. The 2018 statistics of USA Gaming, which is put out by the Entertainment Software Association. These are 2018 statistics. So 70% of gamers are over 18. 33% of gamers are females over 18, which is almost double the number of male gamers who are under 18. then there's the older population where 23% of the gaming population is over the age of 50. I'll say that again, because it may be shocking to some people, is that 23% of gamers are over the age of 50. And the reason to explain that is the genre varies. So, yeah, under 18 males, typically, stereotypically, war games, fighting games, shooting games. But when you look at, females over from like 35 to 50, it's a lot of the 5-minute Candy Crush, Diner Dash, quick games on the iPhone. Whereas for the over 50 crowd, you're looking at digitized versions of their board games like Scrabble and Boggle. I mean, my mother, a retired medical doctor, she was playing Boggle and Scrabble for hours on her iPad. It's gaming is much bigger than just children. And it's just the genre that differs that people really need to be alert to. In terms of young children, what it does to them. So young children are, and the thing is if young children play games, it doesn't necessarily mean that children playing video games is inherently bad or they're going to be addicted automatically. There's a very big difference between people playing games and people being addicted to games. It's this analogous to not everyone who drinks is an alcoholic, not by a long shot. And the same is true for gaming. How you know someone's addicted to games, that we can discuss in a little bit. But what happens to children who are playing excessive video games, my observation is that, number one, there's a decrease in physical activity, and all that means. So they lose coordination and development of their physical body. There's an alteration in their posture itself because there's much more hunching over. I mean, it's bad enough kids are sitting in school desks all day hunched over. I mean, I developed thoracic pain from all the sitting I did sitting in school, then sitting for hours playing games. There's other musculoskeletal risks as well, whether it's wrists, shoulders, even as far as neuropathies. But the other major, not side effects, not the right word. The major collateral damage that happens from excessive video game use is sleep deprivation, and that has massive implications for growing children. Emphasis on the growing, meaning that it stops. It doesn't stop. One of the major collateral damages is sleep deprivation, which harms sleep, which harms brain development, which harms growth because most growth hormone is secreted during sleep. Body repair, all sorts of stuff is lost when you don't sleep properly. Other things happen like, and look, there's going to be debate and blowback from these statements. Like there's a shift in socialization. And yes, there are a lot of games that do a lot of socializing. Like you sit next to your friends sometimes, or you're gaming with your friends through the mic and earpieces, and there is socialization that way. But there is a difference socializing when you are looking face to face and you learn how to understand micro expressions that aren't in video games, that isn't through the mic and receiver. It's not there. So there's a learning process of communications that's lost when there's not face to face, like literal face to face. And there's other ways, other activities are sacrificed, whether it's sports, which I fully endorse, or martial arts especially, I think is kind of a really critical life skill in this day and age, not necessarily just for self-defense, but to learn how to deal with adversity in a relatively safe environment that has some stakes in it. The other thing that's lost is time with family. I know I skipped many family meals in order to video games. Now, I was a genuine addict, so there's shades of gray there in terms of how many meals you miss and whether it becomes a problem or not, and at what point. Other problems that this is pure conjecture on my part, but when you fire the stress response constantly from the tectospinal reflex, that visual mediated and sound mediated reflex that triggers that stress response, my conjecture is that you get a type of digital castration, meaning that when your body is secreting stress hormones, it reduces or slows the production of sex hormones, which children need to grow and to become and develop full adults. So the more one's stress response is fired, the more one's hormone system is disrupted. Now, that's just my conjecture, just from my understanding of physiology. But I believe that is an influence. And even if you just look at the sleep deprivation alone, that would disrupt people's hormonal development is enough to show that there's consequences if people game too much and it disrupts their sleep and triggers a lot of stress.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break, and I want to expand on that a little bit more when we come back. You're listening to HealthMade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Sam Shay talking about gaming disorders. Welcome back to HealthMade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Dr. Sam Shay talking about how you can unplug from gaming disorder. So you were talking about some of the impacts about, in regards to gaming, and one obviously were the hormones that you're missing out on if you're up all night gaming instead of sleeping. You have human growth hormones, you have melatonin. There's a lot of, and if you're missing out on those, melatonin, obviously crucial for detoxifying the brain. It's the major antioxidant for the brain and brain protector. So if you don't have that, then you're more likely to be impacted by chemicals around you and heavy metals and so forth. And then the human growth hormones, which is crucial for growing. I mean, if you don't have that, then muscles, tendons, your growth, all of that is stunted. And you're talking about the cortisol as a steroid and its impact on the whole that steroid pathways, with testosterone and progesterone, DHEA, and all the different sex hormones that are crucial for both male and female development, and its impact on the brain as well. So many studies showing that these hormones are crucial for the brain development, and by missing out on that will really change who you are as an individual. So, how would you define then this gaming disorder? You said that for some people it's okay. It's a little bit here and there, just like somebody that drinks is alcohol is not necessarily an alcoholic. How would you define a gaming disorder?
Well, the signs of a gaming disorder came from the American Psychology Association, and they're the 9 signs that you could pretty much ascribe to any addictive behavior. And this is not, and these 9 categories are not specific to gaming. They're quite useful to see if one is engaging in any destructive or, as I said before, cannibalistic behavior. So these are the 9 signs of potential gaming disorder, like when you can see how they're cannibalizing one's life. So the first one is preoccupation, like thinking and planning for the next gaming session, like I did. Instead of engaging in a conversation at the dinner table, I just be thinking about gaming, just constantly thinking. I'm at school, I'm thinking about it. When I'm on the bus home, I'm thinking about it. I'm not paying attention at meals, I'm thinking about it. That's the first sign, preoccupation. Second sign is withdrawal, meaning there's discomfort or side effects when you want to stop or try to stop or can't, or it's taken away. And so the withdrawal symptoms for me, when my sister performed a motomectomy back in the mid-90s, when there was no Wi-Fi, there was no Ethernet. It was a true motomectomy. You had no access to internet otherwise. I had anxiety, started overeating, got upset, very, very unpleasant. So withdrawal is the second sign. Third sign is tolerance, which means you need more and more of the stimuli to get the same rush. So in video games, it's like upgrading equipment, downloadable content, bored with old games, faster games, more brighter colors, etc. Fourth sign is you can't reduce or stop, so trying to stop but can't stop, like relapsing, like I did many times. Fifth criteria is giving up other activities. So I gave up socializing, I gave up sports, I gave up time with family and friends. That was my sign number 5 of giving up other activities. Sign number 6 is continuing despite problems. So we talked about sleep deprivation, we talked about musculoskeletal issues from excessive gaming. The seventh sign is deception/covering up. So I lied about my video game usage. Oh, I'm just doing homework, when really I was gaming. Or I even I stuffed a towel under that crack under the door at night to hide the ambient glow of the screen, to hide the fact that I was gaming instead of sleeping. Sign number 8 is escaping adverse moods, so using games to numb out. And the ninth sign is risking or losing relationships or opportunities, like skipping exams or missing exams or screwing up on homework or not making it to social functions or whatever it might be. Those are the 9 potential signs of a gaming disorder, and there is no clean metric to say if you have 4 out of 5 signs or 7 out of 9 signs or whatever to say that one has a gaming disorder. What I will say is that I made 3 separate measurable signs, red flags, that there might be a genuine gaming disorder, emphasis on might. So I took the definition of heavy drinking, according to the CDC, as over 14 drinks a week for males, and just translated one standard drink to one standard hour of gaming. So heavy gaming, by my definition, is gaming over 14 hours a week. Heavy gaming doesn't mean you're an addict. It means you're heavy gaming. Just like heavy drinking doesn't mean you're an alcoholic. It means you're heavy drinking. Have a closer look. See if there's something more going on, or these other 9 signs happening. The second red flag is binge gaming, which I scrolled up on the same page as CDC had heavy drinking on, and binge drinking is defined as over 4 drinks within a 2-hour time span for males. So I just translated across to binge gaming as gaming for over 4 hours straight without at least a 2-hour continuous break in between, to quote detox. So if you game for 4.5 hours, that's binge gaming. If you game for 3 hours, take a half-hour break, and play for another hour, that's still binge gaming because there wasn't 2 hours to break it up. And then the third measurable sign is you game more hours than you sleep. That's an inarguable. Oh, I slept 8 hours. Yeah, but you gamed 9. I only gamed 5. Yeah, but you slept 4. That is an absolute red flag right there if you game more hours than you sleep. So I say if you're addicted, you have to go through the 9 signs and really have an honest evaluation. But the 3 red flags of heavy gaming, binge gaming, and gaming more hours than you sleep are a very clear, demonstrable window into, is it necessary to look for those 9 other signs?
Yeah. And how, I mean, when somebody then find out that they're dealing with this gaming disorder, or maybe it's a family that recognize that their son, their daughter, or spouse, are dealing with this kind of addiction, what are some steps that can be taken? Well,
the first is to assess these 9 signs. Like, is there actually an issue? And check the 3 red flags. Now the thing about addiction with people 18 and under is that the parents are still legal guardians, so they can actually enforce behavioral change, like taking the thing away, like taking the gaming station away, unplugging the internet, taking away privileges. It gets trickier when children become of age and the parents have less legal authority over them. So that's a nuance that's very real, and it can be so parents have a lot more authority than they may realize. But the issue is that for parents, the blowback and the hostility that the children may exhibit is a very real threat. And a lot of parents I've talked to are just literally afraid of the blowback from their kids. But if there is a way to, there's a big answer and a smaller answer. The smaller answer involves in how do you limit the actual gaming itself. And to be clear, like, addiction is a much deeper problem than merely removing the vice. It's way bigger than merely removing the vice, because the person who's addicted will switch vices. And they'll switch. I switch to sugar or back to video games, and other people will just switch to different things. So these are actually 2 separate yet parallel conversations. What do you do specifically about the video games, and what do you do about the bigger picture of the addiction itself? So to go to the smaller conversation about what do you do specifically for the games, there's a couple things. One, if you're dealing with whether it's a child or an adult, you remove all gaming from the bedroom. Full stop. Just remove it all, because you don't want to risk gaming sacrificing your sleep. Because if you lose sleep, then your resilience goes down, and then you're not able to properly deal with the anxiety, which then leads more gaming and becomes a vicious circle. Number two is you don't have video games after 8 p.m. because then you reduce the risk of triggering a stress response from playing games, which then amps you up and makes it harder for you to sleep. The third way is not to play alone and not isolate yourself. The other way is to cut a day of gaming for a week, a so-called digital detox. Those are four ways. I have 7 total ways in my ebook titled Unplug from Gaming Disorder. And that I go into a lot more detail on different ways to actually deal with specifically video games, but also it touches a great deal on addiction itself, which I can describe. So with how do you deal with the addiction on a bigger picture as opposed to just the vice used by the addiction cycle is to look at the actual cycle of addiction itself and where one needs to intervene. So
let's actually take a quick break because
Sure.
I want to be able to kind of get into that a little bit deeper. You're listening to HealthMade Radio, this fascinating subject talking about gaming disorder with Dr. Sam Shay. We'll be right back. Welcome back to HealthMade Radio. We are discussing a subject that I think is just rampant. It's gaming disorders and its impact on your life and impact on society. I mean, it bleeds over in so many different ways. So you're talking about two aspects in regards to dealing with this gaming disorder. One is removal of the vice, and you mentioned 4 steps, and there are more steps in your ebook, the gaming disorder, Unplugged from Gaming Disorder. And then in regards to the addiction, what do you do there? Because obviously, if, like you said, if you get rid of one, then you gotta channel that energy somewhere else. So how do you deal with the addiction?
So I created a secular model called Tame the Beast of Addiction, BEAST. And the reason I call it a secular model is because a lot of people do get help from 12-step programs, and a lot of people are turned off by them because of the top-heavy theism that comes with the 12-step model, whether it's subtle or overt. And people need help one way or another. So I intentionally created a secular model that anyone can use regardless what their religious beliefs are. So the BEAST model is BEAST, and it's a cycle. So to understand addiction, all addictions, by everything I've experienced, witnessed, and researched, follow these exact same 5 steps. First is B, they believe a stressful thought. We mentioned several stressful thoughts before. I'm bored. My world's falling apart. For teenagers, it's like, no one understands me, the world is unfair, I'm bored, etc. For adults, the stressful thoughts there's many. Here's the high points are, he, she hurt me, he, she betrayed me, the world is unsafe, I have to make a decision, there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's too much to do. Those are really, really common stressful beliefs. And when you believe a stressful thought, then there's E, the E in the BEAST acronym. The E, the second phase, is an emotional physical stress response, which can be anxiety, nervousness, depression, anger, rage, grief, jealousy, muscle tension, physical pain. It's an emotional physical stress response. And then A is you then anesthetize the physical emotional stress response with a vice. In this case, is video games and sugar. So then the 4th step is S of BEAST. The S stands for smolder and the consequences. And we alluded to a bunch of those consequences, like physical problems, missing opportunities, affecting relationships, and depending on what the vice is, with video games or alcohol or drugs, there's legal consequences. Video games has very few legal consequences, if any, whereas drugs and alcohol has its own variety of legal consequences. So it's basically there's the consequences from the vice. And then the T of the BEAST model is terrible thoughts, terrible stressful thoughts about oneself, about the consequences one rendered from the vice one used, from the emotions one felt from the stressful thought one believed. And the terrible thoughts are, I'm a piece of XYZ, I just harmed my relationship, my career, my education, my health, my family life. And if I believe those terrible thoughts, then I have an emotional physical stress response, then I want to numb out, and then I have consequences, and I have more terrible thoughts, and if I believe them, the cycle just cycles around. It goes around and around and around. So that's the addiction cycle. And at each phase, there's a different way to step out of that cycle. So the root of addiction is believing the root stressful thoughts. And I recommend things like the work of Byron Katie or EMDR or cognitive behavioral therapy. There's a lot of techniques as long as it identifies and questions the stressful beliefs, underlying deep-seated stressful beliefs. For the E phase, the emotional physical stress response, that's where functional medicine comes in and shines. That's to step out of that is about increasing your resilience. Because there's a lot of people who have stressful thoughts, but they have a high enough resilience that they don't feel so awful enough that they need a vice to numb out. So resilience, you look at functional medicine. I have a 10 pillars of health model. People have other models. My model, you look at brain, you look at bowel and digestion, you look at structure, you look at exercise, toxins, nutrition, routines, stressors in one's life, infections, and sleep. Those are my 10 pillars. Other people have other outstanding models as well. But the key is to have a model for functional medicine to look at one's resilience in a very logical, systematic way. The third step is what we described before. For dealing with the vice itself and the anesthetized phase, that's where you have to get into specific strategies to remove, reduce, or replace the vice. We talked about those with video games, like reducing use, removing video games from the bedroom. Some people need a replacement to temporarily buy time to deal with one's resilience and stressful beliefs. With the smolder category, they've got to identify all the different consequences and then all the single smallest changes one can do to try to reverse the damage, to build, and then just keep building momentum. And then with the terrible thoughts phase, that's the phase where people, they feel very bad about themselves. That's bottom. That the T phase is bottom. I feel terrible, or I have thoughts that are terrible about myself, and that's when people reach out for help. And what's really, really important is that the terrible thoughts about oneself that perpetuate the cycle are not the same thoughts that initiated the cycle. That's very, very important. A lot of people chase after the stressful thoughts about how bad they feel from using the vice, instead of going back to the root stressful beliefs that triggered the cycle in the first place. That is absolutely critical for people to understand, that they have a mechanism and a tool and training on how to identify the root belief systems as opposed to chase after the terrible thoughts they have about themselves. So that's my model. If people listening want a free worksheet, they can text gaming disorder to 33444 and just put in gaming disorder, all one word, no caps, no spaces, to 33444, and they can get a free worksheet that goes over this beast model in detail and how to start to implement it.
Yeah, I think that's such an important subject because the impact that it has not only on the individual, but socially and economically and healthcare-wise, I think is huge with this disorder. So, I mean, you're mentioning, how many people do you feel, you mentioned percentages, but how many people in the United States and the world are dealing with this kind of disorder?
I think, this may get me into trouble, I think nearly everyone has some degree of, you say gaming disorder or addiction cycles in general?
Well, I know we all have addiction cycles. It's almost it's impossible to live, I think, without having addiction cycles. But going into just gaming disorder and isolating that from other addictions like alcohol and other type of sugar or whatever other addiction you're dealing with, but just gaming disorder alone. What? I cannot put a number on that, except it's growing. That's the only thing that I can say. I mean, you've got third world countries that are now being flooded with smartphones, and they're being hooked up to the internet with no multi-decade, developmental process like we've had in the States, going from like dial-up all the way up to high-speed Wi-Fi. They're going straight to Wi-Fi.
And the first things that are going to be one of the first things that are going to be downloaded, aside from social media and pornography, is going to be video games.
Yeah.
And when you look at video gaming specifically, it's actually a subset of screen addiction. Screen use is passive, active, or mixed. Active is things like video games where you're interacting. Passive is watching like Game of Thrones or something. Mixed is social media where you can either choose to be active or passive. So when you define video games, it also has to look very carefully at social media, because a lot of the same neurological triggers like affective spinal reflex are identical in social media. Even if you're not playing a game, there's all these pop-up things and movements and ads and the little numbers that show up and how many messages or likes. A lot of these same triggers are being used in social media. So, these same concepts of how do you help with gaming disorder translate almost identically over to dealing with social media overuse disorder. I mean, I'm not sure if that's the official phrase or not, but it's close enough. And the number is just going to grow and grow and grow and grow. I think the two fastest growing objects or vices of addiction is going to be sugar and screens over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I have no doubt. And I know also, I remember reading a long time ago in regards to, the passive just screen time watching TV, and the binge watching and just sitting in front of there and what it did to the brain. And one of the things that was pointed out was the lack of movement of the eyes, meaning that you have just a very defined space that your eyes are moving within. And the eye movement had such a crucial impact on the stimulation of the brain. So by just isolating that movement, you only stimulated the brain in very specific areas, and the other areas of the brain then tended to atrophy.
I would agree with that. I mean, I did functional neurology, and there's a huge section on eye movements and the direction you move your eyes and its different effects on, what the parietal lobe in one direction versus the other. Cerebellum is triggered by different directions you look the eyes. Like, there's so much involved with eye movements. You're absolutely correct. And then you narrow that field even more with handheld games and iPhones. Yeah. Now the screen is shrunk even more.
Yeah, exactly. So it's and you're mentioning that I know we're running short of time, but you're mentioning like EMDR, which has to do with eye movement and accessing then emotions and traumas to heal from those emotions, traumas, and by then isolating your eye movements to a very small space, which means that you are then not connecting with those traumas and not able to heal those traumas because you don't access them through your eye movement.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I view EMDR as shaking the Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's almost quite literal. But yeah, I'm a big fan of EMDR. I'm a huge fan of the work of Byron Katie. People want to see a trained psychologist. I recommend cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, there's many ways to address the root belief systems. So the key is that people have to be honest with themselves that there are root belief systems, including I'm bored.
Yeah,
which is absolutely the single most sinister stressful thought, I think, on the planet. People don't realize that it's a stressful thought.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dr. Shay, for your work and for bringing this to light. It is something that heavily needs to be discussed. That is all for today. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt with HealthMade Radio. Remember to connect with us at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.